digital public sphere is frequently consumed by intense, often personal, disputes between prominent online figures. A recent and potent example involves Ethan Klein and Hasan, hosts of the formerly popular political comedy podcast Leftovers. Their collaboration, which began after previous joint appearances and debates, dissolved dramatically following a nearly 4-hour discussion centered on the highly charged issue of the Israel-Palestine conflict in late 2023. This disagreement escalated into what has been described as a bitter public feud, marking the permanent end of their joint show. Klein-Piker command significant audiences as established YouTubers and Twitch streamers, lending their fallout considerable visibility. This incident, however, is far from unique. It represents a recurring pattern within contemporary online political discourse, particularly among those identifying with the left or progressive ideologies. High-profile individuals engage in protracted, emotionally laden conflicts that capture widespread attention, often overshadowing the substantive issues supposedly at stake. Both Klein and Piker have histories intertwined with controversy. Piker has faced backlash for comments on 9/11 and the Gaza war, attracting criticism from news outlets and political figures like Congressman Richie Torres, leading to pressure on advertisers. Klein has faced multiple YouTube suspensions for controversial statements, including remarks about bombing an NRA convention and comments directed at conservative commentator Ben Shapiro. This context highlights the often volatile and personalized nature of discourse on these platforms. While often framed as necessary ideological clarifications or principled stands, the primary function of these public feuds within the current media landscape appears to be that of distracting entertainment. They appeal strongly to emotion, center on personalities and perceived loyalties or betrayals, and ultimately divert attention from the complex, systemic issues they claim to address. This dynamic, fueled by the very architecture of online platforms, ultimately benefits elite and authoritarian interests by fragmenting potential opposition, hindering collective action, and preserving the existing power structures. This analysis will explore this phenomenon, using the Klein-Piker conflict as a central case study, comparing it to analogous tactics employed on the political right, applying Antonio Gramsci's theory of cultural hegemony, and drawing upon historical warnings about the dangers of infighting. Crucially, the medium itself is not neutral. It actively shapes and amplifies this dynamic. Online platforms, driven by engagement metrics, often prioritize content that evokes strong emotional reactions, features recognizable personalities, and generates controversy. Feuds between well-known figures fit these criteria perfectly, transforming complex political disagreements into serialized drama, optimized for clicks, views, and shares. This contentification of political conflict ensures that the spectacle of infighting receives disproportionate attention, effectively crowding out more nuanced, less immediately gratifying systemic analyses. The platform's logic rewards the performance of conflict over the collaborative work of political change. To understand how such spectacles serve dominant interests requires delving into the concept of power itself. Antonio Gramsci, an Italian Marxist philosopher and political theorist imprisoned by Mussolini, offered profound insights into how power operates beyond mere force. His work, particularly the Prison Notebooks, remains highly relevant for analyzing contemporary political and cultural dynamics. Gramsci developed the theory of cultural hegemony to explain the persistent power of ruling classes in capitalist societies. He argued that dominance is maintained not just through coercion, the state's police and military power, or political society, but more effectively through ideology and culture within civil society. Cultural hegemony describes the process whereby the ruling class establishes its own values, beliefs, norms, and explanations as the dominant, widely accepted common sense of an era. This worldview becomes naturalized, seen as inevitable or universally beneficial, even by those whose interests it does not serve. This dominance is achieved by manufacturing the spontaneous consent of the governed. People come to actively or passively accept the prevailing social order because the dominant ideology shapes their understanding of the world, their aspirations, and their sense of what is possible or legitimate. Gramsci identified key institutions within civil society such as schools, religious institutions, the media, and cultural organizations as crucial sites for producing and reproducing this hegemonic culture. In the 21st century, digital media platforms have undeniably become powerful additions to this list, shaping discourse and disseminating ideologies on an unprecedented scale. The maintenance of hegemony is not only about promoting the ruling ideology, but also about neutralizing potential challenges. This is where the phenomenon of distracting infighting becomes particularly relevant. Hegemony operates effectively when it can marginalize or co-opt counter-hegemonic forces, those that seek to challenge the dominant worldview and build alternatives. Public spectacles like the Klein-Piker feud, amplified by both social and traditional media, serve this neutralizing function remarkably well. They channel critical energy and public attention into internecine battles focused on individual conduct, ideological purity, and emotional responses. The debate shifts from a collective analysis of, for instance, the systemic drivers of international conflict or the role of U.S. foreign policy, to questions of who is the better leftist, who committed the greater offense, or whose audience is more loyal. This functions as a form of managed dissent. The system permits, and platforms even amplify, conflicts within subordinate or oppositional groups. This creates an illusion of vibrant political debate while effectively containing it. Energy is expended on internal boundary policing and personality clashes, preventing the formation of a unified historic bloc. Gramsci's term for a broad alliance of social forces united by a common counter-hegemonic vision. By keeping potential opposition fragmented and focused inward, the dominant hegemonic order remains unchallenged. The appearance of struggle masks the reality of containment, ensuring that dissent rarely coalesces into a force capable of demanding fundamental systemic change. The effort spent debating who is sufficiently pure detracts from building the broad alliances necessary to confront entrenched power. The effectiveness of these distractions hinges significantly on their appeal to emotion over rational analysis. Examining the Klein-Piker feud illustrates this dynamic within left-leaning online spaces. Their final Leftovers episode was a lengthy, detailed discussion of the Israel-Palestine conflict, indicating an initial attempt at substantive engagement. However, the subsequent public fallout transformed this complex geopolitical issue into a highly personalized and acrimonious spectacle. Audience engagement inevitably shifted towards taking sides, dissecting perceived slights and betrayals, expressing loyalty or disappointment, and reacting to the emotional tenor of the conflict. The focus became less about understanding the historical context, international law, or systemic forces driving the conflict, and more about adjudicating the interpersonal drama between two prominent online figures. The critical question morphed from what systemic issues are at play to who is right and who is wrong within this feud. This dynamic finds a striking parallel in the strategic use of wedge issues by the political right. Wedge issues are typically social or cultural topics intentionally employed to divide opposing political groups or galvanize a base. Contemporary examples frequently deployed by right-wing actors include transgender rights and immigration. These campaigns often rely heavily on stoking powerful emotions like fear, resentment, moral outrage, and anxiety about social change. Complex issues are simplified into binary oppositions, often involving misinformation and the creation of scapegoats, or folk devils, marginalized groups portrayed as threats to social order, traditional values, or economic well-being. The function here is also distraction. By focusing public anger and anxiety on cultural battles or marginalized communities, attention is diverted from potentially unifying economic grievances, the impacts of corporate power, or failures in governance. For example, anxieties about healthcare costs and accessibility, a widespread concern, can be channeled into resentment towards transgender individuals allegedly receiving taxpayer-funded healthcare, obscuring the reality that LGBTQ+ people often face greater barriers to healthcare access and higher medical debt. Similarly, concerns about wages or job security can be redirected towards immigrants rather than towards economic policies or corporate practices. Political elites, regardless of party, can benefit when the populace is divided by identity-based wedge issues, overlooking shared material interests and the concentration of wealth and power. Despite the vastly different content and specific targets, the underlying mechanism shares a core logic. Both the spectacle of left-wing infighting and the deployment of right-wing wedge issues operate by simplifying complexity, reducing multifaceted political, social, or economic problems to easily digestible, often binary conflicts, leveraging emotion, prioritizing outrage, fear, loyalty, or resentment over nuanced analysis and systemic understanding, creating divisions, fostering in-group, out-group dynamics that hinder broader solidarity and collective action. Within left online spaces, the intense focus on ideological purity and the policing of boundaries can functionally mirror the moral panics stoked by the right. While the aims may differ, one seeking ideological coherence, the other mobilizing a base through perceived threats, the effect can be similar, consuming energy in internal battles or boundary defense, fragmenting potential coalitions, and distracting from the larger struggle against systemic inequalities and dominant power structures. This comparison underscores how, across the political spectrum, emotionally charged conflicts, whether internally generated or externally imposed, can serve to obscure the fundamental economic and political structures that shape societal outcomes, ultimately benefiting those who hold power within the existing system. The detrimental impact of internal conflict on collective endeavors is not a novel observation confined to the digital age. History offers stark warnings about the perils of factionalism and infighting, demonstrating how such divisions can weaken political movements, undermine social change efforts, and even destabilize nations. One of the earliest and most prominent warnings in the American context comes from George Washington's farewell address in 1796. As he stepped down from the presidency, Washington cautioned vehemently against the baneful effects of the spirit of party. He feared that prioritizing loyalty to a faction or party over the common interests of the nation would foster a spirit of revenge, create opportunities for cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men to seize power, and make the country vulnerable to foreign influence and corruption. Washington urged Americans to see their common cause and shared interests, arguing that unity was the main prop of liberty. His address serves as a foundational text on the idea that internal divisions obscure shared goals and weaken the collective body politic. Beyond the realm of national governance, social and political movements throughout history have been hampered or destroyed by internal strife. Factionalism is recognized as a common, almost inherent challenge in movements striving for social change, given the passion involved and the difficulty of agreeing on complex problems and solutions. Examples abound. Splits within the U.S. civil rights movement over strategy and ideology. Conflicts between the German leftist Social Democrats and communists, resulting in a lack of focus on countering Nazism. Factional battles within anti-war movements, such as the fragmentation of Students for a Democratic Society over tactical disagreements during a period of shifting political opportunities. Conflicts that have historically divided labor movements. Revolutionary movements crippled by infighting, such as the complex and competing factions, socialist, communist, anarchist, nationalist, during the Spanish Civil War, which hindered a united front against fascism. The intense factionalism during China's Cultural Revolution, where groups professing loyalty to the same leader fought violently, often based on pre-existing social statuses or choices made in ambiguous political contexts. These historical cases reveal common patterns. Internal disputes over ideology, tactics, leadership, or the distribution of resources consume energy, breed mistrust, and divert attention from the external adversary or the primary goals of the movement. Political science research further reinforces this, indicating that internal conflicts tend to deteriorate state capacity, unlike external wars, which can sometimes compel states to strengthen their administrative and extractive functions. Indeed, factionalism is identified as one of the most potent predictors of major political instability, including civil wars and adverse regime changes. Connecting these historical lessons to the present day, the contemporary online environment appears to significantly exacerbate the dangers of factionalism. The speed, reach, and algorithmic amplification inherent in social media platforms can transform disagreements into widespread, rapidly escalating public spectacles. Minor differences can be magnified, and conflicts can become intensely personalized and performative. This makes online infighting an especially potent tool for distraction and demobilization, potentially far more effective at capturing attention and diverting energy than the slower-moving factional disputes of the pre-digital era. Furthermore, it is crucial to recognize that factionalism is not always solely an internal failure of a movement or group. It can be, and often is, influenced, exacerbated, or even deliberately stoked by external forces. Governments and powerful actors may intentionally sow discord within opposition movements through infiltration, disinformation, or by selectively amplifying certain voices or conflicts. Politicians may strategically time controversial policy announcements to coincide with distracting news events, minimizing scrutiny. The concept of wedge strategies is even used in international relations to break apart potential enemy coalitions. The intense media focus on the Klein-Piker feud, including coverage by outlets like Fox News and criticism from political figures, exemplifies how internal disputes become vulnerable to external exploitation. Actors who benefit from a divided and distracted populace can readily leverage these conflicts for their own agendas, further reinforcing the hegemonic structures the infighting purports to challenge. High-profile feuds within broad ideological camps, like between Klein and Piker, function largely as counterproductive distractions in the contemporary digital media environment. While potentially originating from genuine disagreements, their amplification through online platforms transforms them into emotionally charged spectacles. These spectacles harness platform dynamics, prioritizing engagement and personality over substance, effectively diverting public attention and critical energy away from complex, systemic analysis and coordinated action. In doing so, they inadvertently reinforce the very cultural hegemony that insulates dominant economic and political interests from fundamental challenge. The costs of this dynamic are significant. Valuable energy and resources are expended on internal conflicts rather than on addressing the root causes of social, economic, and political problems. Potential coalitions are fractured before they can form, breeding cynicism and despair among those who desire change. The constant barrage of personalized drama and ideological purity tests makes sustained focus on complex long-term issues incredibly difficult, leaving populations feeling overwhelmed and disempowered. As Anderson in Yes Magazine notes, engaging in unserious squabbles and political theater degrades perspective and disrupts the focus needed to confront urgent crises. Moving beyond this cycle requires conscious effort and a shift in focus. Individuals must cultivate critical media literacy, learning to recognize emotionally manipulative narratives and deliberately employ distraction tactics. This involves diversifying information sources beyond echo chambers, questioning the framing of conflicts, and pausing to reflect before reacting to sensationalized content. More fundamentally, there needs to be a collective shift away from the allure of personalized online drama and the often narcissistic pursuit of ideological purity. Instead, energy should be directed towards building broad, pragmatic coalitions capable of addressing shared material interests and challenging systemic power structures. This echoes Gramsci's emphasis on the need for a counter-hegemonic struggle rooted in strategic alliances and the development of alternative institutions and narratives. It means identifying the true enemy, not rival factions within a broad movement, but the concentrated economic and political power structures that perpetuate inequality and injustice, and organizing collectively to confront it. Ultimately, meaningful political engagement demands intentionality and seriousness of purpose. It requires resisting the constant pull of distracting spectacles and committing to the difficult, often unglamorous, work of understanding complex systems, building solidarity across differences, and developing sustainable strategies for transformative change. Only by reclaiming focus from the digital bread and circuses can we hope to effectively challenge the structures of power and build a more just and equitable society.